Okay, so I'm here. I'm going to talk about Pliny a little bit about the letter. I gave you guys the review questions, and it looks like most of you got a hold of that. So the link is working. That is good. Let's see. I asked you first to read the letter, and I really do mean this. And for those of you who are telling me that you don't have 15 minutes a day to go over this, then you certainly have an entire class period that could be spent on this. And I do want you guys just to consider how effectively you use your class time. And I can say this because I'm not looking at any one of you right now. Um, but all of you in general, just think about how effectively you're making use of your class time. I know some of you are, and some of you maybe could do a little better. Um, so the first thing you need to do to be here is to read this. Okay, you've got to be able to read the whole letter without your notes. Even if you can't understand every word, guys, you can understand the gist of what's going on in each section. Okay, so maybe you skip a word here or there. Maybe you have to skip a sentence every now and then. Fine, just keep reading it. Okay, that's the most important thing, number one. Let's see, I asked in line one, I guess really it should say section one, what vocabulary does Pliny use to indicate his relationship with Trajan? So let me go back to here. So look at this. Domine, right there, out of the gate, we have this vocative, master. Um, it is accustomed to me, master, to refer to you, so referiate, omnia, about all things which I doubt. So right away we have this subservient tone with this domine, and we have this idea that this is not the first time that he's gone to him for help. So we're establishing a connection of trust, of leadership, and of definite deferential, not deferential, differential. You know what? I'm just going to let that go. You know what I mean? All right. For indeed, who is better, Melius, able to rule my contiationem, like hesitation, or to instruct my ignorance? And again, this is almost like over the top, a little bit of butt kissing here. But again, he is saying, you're better than me. Okay. You can regulate. Look at the verbs that he uses: regulate, to instruct, to rule, to correct, and to instaurate, to instruct me, like a student to a teacher. Okay. Um, Again, Pliny is very clearly putting himself on a lower level than Trajan. Trajan is going to be above, and Pliny is going to be below. Okay. So those are a couple of the things there in that first line. Let's see. Oh, not that. I was grading your vocab quizzes. Where are we? Here we go. In section two, what is Pliny debating? Be specific. Okay, so in section two, here, we talked about this so many times. Remember, he is debating about the age. He's like, Ali quod discriminum, whether there should be some discrimination of age, I taught him. Now, guys, remember, when I say this, I do not want you to write out this whole line. I want you to say, I have hesitated, hesitawi. Ali quod discriminum, whether there should be some discrimination, I taught him, of age or of youth, whether some, of the between the youth and the stronger, or indeed should when a pardon be given to those who are penitent, or who are like, we're sorry. Okay, is there a problem with the name Christian? I was like, should it, let me try this again. Um, is it that there were Christian, or that the name Christian? He's asking right here. Is like, are there flagita coherente, that these are crimes linked to being Christian that should be punished? So it's not just that you once were Christian, but the fact that you've given it up, that's okay. But just the fact that you were associated with some time, that we have to punish you, even if you're not now, you once were. Okay, so we've talked about that to death, so I feel like I kind of don't need to go into that one as much. Let's see, other question. In section three, how does Pliny examine the Christians and former Christians? So in section three, and actually I think I'm wrong here. My son came to me a little while ago and was like, I think you're wrong. And I'm like, oh yeah. Um, he does say here that he does ask them three times. So in section three, he does ask, those ones who were Christian, he's asked them three times. He shows them punishment. It's that line I just think I mean, it's awful, but also kind of funny. It's like those who kept persisting they were Christian, I let them off to die because, frankly, you know, that kind of stubbornness deserves to die. And I'm like, okay then. But we do get into his more debate. I do think it's also pointing here that he points the Roman citizens go back to the city because it's more appropriate for Roman citizens to be tried in Rome. Okay, remember Pliny is off in Bithynia, so he's off in Asia, Asia Minor, more like Turkey, and not really anywhere near Rome. So Roman citizens get sent back to Rome, maybe to even have a think about whether they want to still be Christian when they get there. And then in five, he goes here and he starts to talk about what does he do? So if they have stopped being Christian, if they say they stopped being Christian, okay, so they deny that they were Christian or that they were, but now they're not. Okay, he calls upon the gods and tua imagine. Remember, this is important. So it's not just the Deus that they are calling upon, but it's the imagine tuae, your image. Remember, those imperial cults were very important in Rome, and the imperial cult and the emperor were linked. Like you cannot distinguish between the imperial cult and the Roman gods. So if you worshipped the emperor, you worshipped the gods. And if you pissed off the gods, Rome would die. So there were lots of superstitions in Rome. This one, of course, is an important one. Remember, we talked about the distinguish between the imagine and the simulacris. Okay, so the imagine is an image of a human, where the simulacris is typically more of a sacred statue. Okay, and Pliny orders both of those to be brought out. So he says they worship the gods and your image with incense and wine. Okay, they supplicarent, and they speak evil. They curse Christ. Okay, and he says these are things that re vera, that Christians are not able to do. Okay, I thought to send them away. So he sent them away if they did these things, if they worshipped him and the true gods with incense and wine, and they cursed Christ. And he's like, okay, we're good. Relatively minor thing, I guess. I don't know. But it's actually in section 5, even though I say section 3. Why were the Romans having so much trouble with the Christians? And this is one that we talked about before. And Pliny brings it up a little bit, I think, in the next section. Let's see. He does. I think it is interesting that we do get this look at what the Christians said they had done. Because remember, there was that one person right at the end of right at the beginning of section 7, where Pliny is like, okay, so now this guy who was a Christian is telling me, like, I'm not Christian anymore, but this is the sum total of what we did, right? Of our culpa or our errones. Okay, they got together on a certain day, probably Sunday, before light, and they sang songs to Christ, quasi Dio, as though a god. And this is another one of those points when we talk about how does Pliny view Christianity, and there's a lot in here where he even going back to talking about the inflexible stubbornness and the refusal to see sense, is like it's part of this disease that he believes Christianity is. He doesn't believe Christianity is a real religion. He, of course, doesn't believe in Christ. He is a true blue, I don't even know if you could say true blue Roman, true purple Roman. He's a purple through and through Roman kind of a guy, purple and gold, I guess his colors. So this idea of another religion having the same impact on people that the Roman religion have is still just outside of his wheelhouse. He can't understand that. And when he starts talking to these Christians, he's like, they prayed to Christ like a god, quasi Christo. Again, looking at these subtle hints that Pliny does not view Christianity anywhere near on the same level as the Roman gods. Okay, but that's what they would do. They'd get together on a certain day before light, sing songs to Christ. They would then go away, and then they would. Oh wait, sorry. Before they went away, they also altogether basically swore not to go into thieving or stealing or adultery. They would break no faith, and they would return anything that had been handed to them, to keep. All right, so there would be a little bit of delay, and then they'd come back again and they'd take food together. All right, all together, ordinary and completely harmless. And so Pliny's saying this too. It's almost like this is this sounds harmless enough. And remember that part of the problem that the Romans had had with the Christians was these misinterpretations of early Christian text. And a lot of that, not all of it, but some of it did wrap around the Eucharist or the host, the Last Supper, where Christ uh, gave his disciples wine and said, this is my blood, drink of it, and broke bread and said, this is my flesh, eat of it. And the Romans misinterpret that and misunderstood that. And, we've talked about that quite a lot, about how the Romans thought the early Christians were cannibals, which concerned them, as it would most people. So he's looking at this and he's still not quite sure, really what's going on with these Christians. And he doesn't know how to handle it. But it is like from the form of an outsider looking into something that they truly do not understand and seems a little bit crazy to them. I don't know, kind of like some of the TikTok videos I've seen from you guys. All right. So why were they having trouble with the Christian population? First of all, it was this wild misunderstanding. Okay. They were getting together, they were having these dinners, they were praying to Christ as though he was a god, which made no sense to them. He also said down here that they had ended this, that they were going to stop getting together because, of course, Trajan had forbidden these haterias, which were these political parties, groups of 10 or more, I believe. So because of that, they had stopped altogether this practice of getting together and praying. So that was another problem the Romans were having with the Christians, were these ideas of political uprising. Because remember, the Romans didn't really care at all about who you worship. They really just needed you to promise to worship somewhere in there the Roman gods, because the Roman gods represented the Roman Republic, and you couldn't have one without the other. So that was another problem that the Romans had. So part of it was misinterpretations of Catholic Christian texts. Here, we can do this. So you had a problem with the identity misinterpretation. I can't. Okay, you know what? Give it up. We're just going to say it out. Misinterpretation of text. This idea that Christianity did not worship the same Roman gods that the Romans worshipped, which created a problem for their government system. It also spread. Okay, it spread a lot. And that's another one. You see this. Okay, it's like a contagio. It's a contagion that's wandering through. And it's through civitates, vicus, and agros. So cities and towns and fields, and everyone's becoming Christian. And that's another problem the Romans had with them, is that they weren't content to just be themselves. They spread. Okay, the idea of proselytizing and going out and converting has been a huge part of the Christian church since its foundation. And of course, early Christians were the same thing. Go out and preach and gain more followers. And so that all wraps up into these problems that the Romans had with the Christians. Not really that they worshiped another god. It was that worshiping of another god would not allow for the worship of a Roman god as well. And that threatened the Roman state, which made the Romans think of them not just as a church, but as a political party too. Okay. There was a lot there, but those are sort of the big ones that we've talked about. Let me see. I said go over the discussion questions. No one asked me to go over those again, so I assume that's fine. What were some of the misconceptions? I just went over that. What tone does this letter take? Inquisitive, accusatory, angry? Why? What evidence is there to prove this? This is sort of up to you. Like, there's a lot here. For me, I read into this almost incredulity. Like, as Pliny is looking at this and looking at these Christians, he has got this overwhelming problem. And he's understanding too that it's not just about the Christians. Remember, we talked about this too in class, that these people, this area of Bithynia that he's in, was having problems just within, like, they're having political problems anyway. And so they're ratting each other out as Christian, even if they're not, because they want to get rid of their problem. They're troublemakers. Okay. Again, we compare this to the sort of McCarthyism, the Red Scare. It's like, you want to get rid of a problem, you just call them a commie in public, and suddenly no one talks to them anymore. It's kind of the same thing in Roman times, you called him a Christian, suddenly things got weird. So Pliny's dealing with this huge political problem. Um, and also now he's like, oh my God, why are you calling each other? Why is this a thing? And he doesn't understand why it's a thing. He threatens them with death. They won't stop. He listens to them talk about what they did. It sounds completely innocuous. But then if it's so harmless, why are they having a problem? Why is he still having a problem with it? He spends enough time talking about what they told him they did that this must have been almost incredulous to him. Like he's like, what they say they're doing doesn't sound bad, but nothing I've heard makes sense. These two things aren't making any sense to him. So this questioning, this like, is this really all there is? Should I kill them for this? Is there a reason to kill them for this? It's like, I don't even understand what's going on. Okay, down here, he's like, and this is the other thing about Christianity. It was prevalent not just through the Roman upper echelons, but through the lower ranks, enslaved peoples, children, women, men, high class, middle class, low class. Everybody was becoming Christian. And there's a lot to that. And he says, so not only am I worried about this whole Christian thing, which he obviously doesn't get because he's trying to understand what's going on, and what this Christian told him they did is not meshing with what he thinks they do. But now we also have this like complete problem with like, if I keep assassinating people, I'm going to wipe out half the population. I can't keep killing them, right? He's like, there should be a distinction here. Like, I can't just keep killing young children. And maybe even Pliny the Younger was thinking, God, these kids, I cannot just imprison a kid because they're doing what their mom and dad told them to. Um, he does compare this to a plague or a contagion of some kind. Again, we get this idea that Christianity is, what do I want to say, a disease, a sickness that is spreading throughout the land. Again, it's almost like he can't. He's like, how do I stop it? He's like, I think we can stop it. He does sort of back that truck up a little bit. He's like, I think I'm able to correct this. I think I'm able to stop it, but it's kind of going everywhere. And okay, here's the last thing he points out. Um, we're losing money. Okay, remember he was talking about the carnum, this the meat of the sacrificial animals that was the very rare buyer was being found. So he's also suggesting, and I think I mentioned too, the silver sellers in Delos, I think. I've got to look up the Greek island. They're losing money because of Christians. Christians won't buy it. Christians won't touch anything that looks like it came from another god. So that's a real problem. So now you have very influential people with a lot of money that have a problem with the Christians. Again, not because they're Christian, but because they're costing them money. Do you see how it's not a direct correlation, if that makes sense. They're not mad that they're Christian. If the Christians were still willing to buy the sacrificial animals, they wouldn't have had a problem with them whatsoever. But because they wouldn't, well, now these people are losing money, so that's a problem. All right, so there's a lot there with the Christians and why they're having problems with this. Hold on. What do I do? How does Trajan's response compare? I do think it's really interesting that Trajan's response is so short, and we did talk about that. Such a brief to like, I don't know. Pliny wrote this huge letter. Trajan shot off this quick thing. He's like, fine. And I think we talked about in class how it really doesn't feel like Trajan answered Pliny on most of this. He did say that you do not seek them out if they're brought to you, and if they are condemned, they must be punished. Notice all the passive paraphrastics, all these gerunds plus sum constructions. They must not be sought out, but they must be punished if you find them. Okay. If they were questioned and they denied it, let them, test them, let them go. I think my favorite part of this one, though, is that he says these little books without authors have no place in our society. He calls it the pessimi exempli nostri saeculiast. It is of the worst example and has no place in our society. So Trajan, 2,000 years ago, is telling Pliny that anonymous letters should never be brought to court. Almost in this case, he's looking at, Pliny like, well, duh. He's like, why would you take anonymous sources? Um, Notice the me secunde. Again, there's that very closeness of relationship between the two. So this is a very political letter. This is someone who's very political. I feel like he's giving the arguments of things that have to be done, but notice he's glossing over how to deal with the young, because that's a hard question to ask. And if he puts it in writing, someone could see it. Even 2,000 years ago, politicians are worried about what they put into writing. So I think Trajan would want Pliny to be, read between the lines and be lenient with them, but at the same time, he's not going to put it down because, he's almost afraid of getting caught saying the wrong thing. I feel like this is almost a CYA, politically speaking. He gives the bare minimum answer, just enough to say that he's answered, but it doesn't actually offer a lot of detail. Again, very political. Okay, what parallels can you draw between the letter and modern society? We talked about that in class. Okay, and then I asked about that in the video. Let me check. Hold on just a second. See if there are any questions here that did not. In section 3, how does Pliny examine the Christian? I did talk about that. Um, what are some of the other organizations besides Christians who scared the Romans so much? I don't know that they had anybody that was like this. They had outsiders like the Celtic tribes, some of the outsiders from other North African tribes, Turkey, where you kept having these uprisings where they're kind of crap like that scared the Romans, but nothing that was as insidious as Christianity, because Christianity was in the Roman Empire and they could see it, but they could feel it, but they couldn't see it. It was like this invisible disease. Whereas if Gauls came into Rome, you saw who they were instantly. You're like, oh God, and they smelled. Okay. Will we have to do a direct translation of the text? Yes. Will it be questions of understanding and discussion questions? Yes. Between the Roman times and how specific should we be? Do we need specific answer research? No, you do not have to research any of this. This is based off of strictly what we've done in class and what we've discussed in class. So when I'm talking about parallel times, this is not something, this is probably, hopefully something that you've maybe seen in one of your history classes. I know that Hoda would have done it last year, but I don't know, AP history probably did the same thing. You could certainly even talk about now, when have we seen political or politicians use anonymous sources or the promise of anonymity to get info on people? There's at least one source I can think of within the last 10 years. I'm sure there's more. So you don't necessarily need to research that. I would hope that those, again, and if you don't have something in the last 10 years, then you can go back to the 1950s, okay? Because that should be pretty easy. But there are other examples out there. Yes, I will put this in IB style. I'll make sure everything has questions. Yes, one question will be worth 4 points. One question, 2, I will let you know what they are worth. What types of questions will be worth more than others? Anything that requires the Latin is going to be worth more than others. So the comprehension questions or discussion questions. So the comprehension questions will probably be shorter and worth fewer points, where the discussion questions will be longer and worth more points. But there will probably be more comprehension questions than discussion questions. Does that make sense? So they'll even out. How many points will this test be? Don't know, haven't written it. Yes, it will be divided into different sections in the grade book. Okay, those are all the questions that I have right now. So I'm going to end this video. Whoops. Hopefully this gives you all of the information that you need. It's a very interesting letter. I do enjoy this letter. It's one of the reasons that we did it. We did spend a lot of time on this. So, hopefully you've also spent the last 6 weeks enjoying this letter. Hopefully. We're going to be talking about IAs and internal assessments soon. So HL kids, buckle up. We got a lot to do. All right. Talk to you guys tomorrow.